Hello, everybody. Mine says an error occurred. Does yours say an error occurred? No, we're good to go. All right, fantastic. I'm ignoring the platform, ignoring our producer. Hey, everybody, welcome to another episode of Just Two Dads with my co-host and partner, Mr. Shawn Francis. I am Brian Altunian, and today's topic is, first of all, our guest today is amazing. He's a friend of the show. We've had him on before, and we are business colleagues as well, so we've actually done business together. We're talking about estate planning and legacy planning and a whole bunch of other topics that are going to be critical for families of all kinds, but especially families of children with special needs as we start to plan for our future. So stay tuned. It's going to be a great episode of Just Two Dads. Welcome, everybody, to Just Two Dads. I am Brian Altunian, along with Shawn Francis. If you're catching us live on Facebook, hello, welcome. We hope that you will participate. Ask our guests some questions, put some comments here. We'll try to get them up on the screen. If you're catching us after the fact on our YouTube channel, I hope that you'll subscribe. Also, leave your comments there because we do answer those well as well. If you're hearing us on Google or podcast outlets, wherever, I don't know why Google came to mind, but if you're hearing us on podcast outlets, again, please share. We are justtwodads@gmail.com is our email address. For those of our family out in the U.S. Virgin Islands, WSTX AM radio, and very shortly on Empower Media Communications on Roku channel. Catch us everywhere. Just Two Dads, we are everywhere. So without further ado, we're going to introduce our guest today. We love working with this guy. He's just one of the most sincere, authentic professionals, knows his business so well. But before we get to Glenn, our special guest, I'm going to throw it over to Shawn Francis, my partner in Thrive. Check in on you. How are you doing today, buddy? We haven't even really had a chance to talk much today. How are you?
No, we haven't. It's been pretty hectic, crazy, and busy. I'm just blessed and grateful for the platform, the opportunity to be here today. I dropped my mom and my stepdad off at the airport earlier this morning. They're going on a cruise, and I had to get up and get them to the airport for like 5:30. And I just thought how much of a blessing it is to be able to wake up that early, wake up period at all, and have them in my life. And family is everything. So with that said, I don't want to delay any further in getting into introducing our guest, because he does as we do, which is working for families, generally speaking, but especially in the special needs community. That is none other than Mr. Glen Wagstaff. Glen is a founding partner of Intervivos, one of, if not the largest estate planning firm in the country. And we just we are glad to have him here with us. Glen, welcome.
Great to be here with you guys. It's been a while.
Yes, it has. You visited us about a year ago, and I'll apologize in advance to our audience that for those that saw Glen's visit last year, we may touch on some of the same subjects, but I think there's been a lot of changes that have taken place since that time that we'll definitely touch on. But let's start with yourself, Glen. I mean, not everybody wakes up and decides they want to go into estate planning specifically. Tell us something about that. What led you to it? No, nobody does. At least,
hey, son, what do you want to be when you grow up? You want to be an astronaut? No, Dad, I want to be an estate planning attorney.
Right.
Well, it's kind of like teaching. You appreciate those that teach, but those that teach in the special needs community in particular, especially if they don't have children with special needs, is like, how on earth did you get to that point? And you're just a very service-oriented person, knowing what I know of you and your background. But for those who are hearing your story for the first time, why don't you go ahead and enlighten us?
Yeah, it's funny because I sit down with a lot of other attorneys, and as we bring them on board with the firm and different things like that. And one of them, we were having a lunch conversation, and she says, this is perfect for you. You seem so passionate about estate planning. Is this what you always wanted to do? And I was like, no, I didn't think I was going to do this. I was planning on being a prosecutor, right? That was my intention going into law school, was to be a prosecutor. But, things happen for a reason, I think. And one of the things that happened to me when I was early on in law school was I got disillusioned with the criminal justice system a little bit. And I thought, I don't know whether that's really the approach I want. And then I was working at the time in the insurance and financial industry to pay my way through law school. And so one of my mentors sat me down and he said, hey, have you ever considered estate planning And I said, no, I've done some estate planning. I used to work for a real estate litigation firm, and they had me do their estate planning as it came up, and it's really boring. Why would I do that? So he said, there's going to be a lot of need for it in the next few years. The baby boomers are retiring.
Yeah.
They call it the silver wave, right, of all these families that are going to need services in their later years. And he said,
I get called that all the time, by the way, Glenn. People call when they see, because my hair, which is tamed at the moment, but when it's not, that's what they call me, the silver wave.
That's Brian's nickname, the silver wave.
Yeah, that's what we're going to say. That's my nickname. Yeah, the silver wave. Yeah. Sorry, I totally interrupted you, but
so I promised him I'd look into it. And, at the time, I had just finished my first year of law school. And so I was, looking at internships, and I ended up interviewing with quite a few firms, got a few offers. And the one that seemed the best fit was a boutique estate planning firm up in, Salt Lake. And I started working with them, and, it was a completely different experience because every single person we sat down with had a different need, a different family situation, different sort of, plan. And so we addressed their planning according to their needs. It was just a different experience than what I had done previously. Because a lot of firms just use templates, and it's just, you put in your name, you put in your address, and everybody gets the same thing, right? And so I fell in love with the process, and part of it was just simply because I was meeting with so many people that had different, varying needs, and helping them with what they actually needed.
That's kind of scary when you think of it, to have a situation and something as important as an estate plan to be cookie cutter, one size fits all. And,
but that's what we've gotten used to as a society, right? I mean,
yes.
How many meetings have we had with people, and then they just assume that that's going to be the process because they don't know any different, right? That's what they expect from the industry.
Right.
By the way, in law is the same way. When I was in the entertainment industry, you did a contract. It was basically just the same contract with a few different variables. So I remember seeing contracts that somebody said, well, I just grabbed it from a studio contract and did this whole thing. And they were like, okay, but there are clauses that actually are in direct conflict with a previous clause. Like, oh, it's just a template. I just grabbed whatever. Amazing to see how much gets done on that sort of template mentality.
Well, so let me share a story with you.
Yeah.
My aunt has an aunt who needed to do her estate plan, and she was planning around Medicaid and Medi-Cal and just, making sure that things were going to be in place so she could get benefits. And so she wanted to make sure that the plan was done properly. So she researched all the best attorneys with the best reviews in the entire state. And she narrowed it down to, a top list, and the one that had the best presence online and everything that she could find was an attorney out of LA, and she lives in Southern California in Orange County. And so, they had to pay hourly for this attorney to drive down and meet with them in person. And then they paid something like $8,000 for the plan that she set up, right? And then after the fact, after everything was finished, then she called me up and she said, hey, by the way, can you review this for me? And so I did, right? I reviewed it. It's unfortunate because this is the best, according to Google, the best attorney in Southern California for estate planning and specifically for Medicaid planning, what she wanted to do, right? And so we reviewed the document, and in the document we found the previous client's information.
No way.
They hadn't even double checked to make sure that they didn't
because they were so busy doing a template.
Well, they're not reading their own documents.
Automating.
The attorney didn't do it. The attorney gave it to some paralegal. The paralegal went through their standard processes. The attorney probably intended to look it over, but didn't, and then turned it over to the client. And when we reviewed it, we found a whole bunch of errors, and we found the previous client's information. And this was a plan that they probably paid over $10,000 for.
Wow.
Now it's gonna be okay. One of the biggest challenges I'm gonna have, you heard me spitting my words out, is staying on task in any kind of chronological order today. Brian, I apologize in advance.
What?
Because
it's not like you, Shawn.
Hey, stop that.
Or me, by the way. I'm right there with you. So point out, right, the three fingers point. And
because I wanted to keep with Glenn's story and this order and everything. But when you just mentioned what the industry generally does, we've had people on here and we promote the work that people do to an extent. We lift people up. We don't ever have a pitch or a promotion. But the more I've sat with you, with clients that we've served together, us handling the financial portion of it and you handling the estate planning, I find so much more appreciation for what you do. And you just explained what people generally go through. So let's review. You will pay a fee to go see someone, whether they serve you or not, right? You may have an instance as the one you've just described where there's a disservice that is thrust upon the current client and the former client, right? And then on top of that, there's more of a fee that you're going to pay to make any changes to correct those things. Hopefully they would have been right about it and owned the mistake and not charged for it, but no one can make that assumption. The manner in which you work, much as we do, is that your plans are customized. You charge a flat fee for the service itself, putting the plan together, which is customized, but no fee for the consultation. I don't know if people understand what that means. And that means that you're serving hundredaires, thousandaires, millionaires, and billionaires, regardless of their status. And I think that that's something that's tremendous.
I have something to add. So Glenn, I'm going to share our current situation. Here's something I think there's probably more common examples that are like that, right? You review somebody's document and there's stuff in there that's wrong, right? But by the way, I think legal documents like accounting, if you put a bunch of lawyers or a bunch of accountants together, they're going to find something wrong in general. But in your particular case, that's blatant, like that old client's information. But here's a situation which I never anticipated. I had have a client who I had referred her to a local attorney who was putting her trust together, and phenomenal guy, caring. By the way, did a lot of stuff in the special needs community, which is why we had a really close relationship. And then he passed away. And when he passed away, all of his files were locked in his office. In fact, he was renting an office from a law firm. They just closed the door and locked it and didn't do anything. And in fact, to get her information from the other firm, we had to jump through a lot of hoops and a lot of steps to get access to her stuff to then have Glenn review it. By the way, they didn't even have it. Well, if they had it electronically, they can't get into his computer. So now those documents, all we have is a file that's about 2 inches thick of printed documents that Glenn has to go through. And Glenn, I promised you I was going to send that to you a couple weeks ago, and I'm looking at it over there. So I'll get it out to you ASAP. But anyways, that's something that you would never anticipate, right? That your estate planning attorney dies.
Yeah, the dentist's kids have the worst teeth, right?
Right.
That sort of thing.
Cobbler's shoes, yeah.
Yeah, so in Las Vegas right now, there's a big issue, and I don't know, maybe they've resolved it since, but the last couple years they've been dealing with this. That they have an entire football field's worth of bankers boxes of cases from attorneys that have passed away and left their cases without representation, right? And they can't reassign the cases fast enough to get enough attorneys to actually take on the work. So I mean, things like that happen, and unfortunately, without a proper plan ourselves as attorneys, we leave our clients in a bad situation. One of the nice things about what we do is we have over 100 attorneys, and we have an internal succession plan and everything else, so that doesn't happen to us, hopefully, knock on wood.
Yeah. Well, that's what if you have a there's one thing that said, if you have a sole proprietor who is caring and handles clients personally one-on-one, even if he had an estate plan or a succession plan, he didn't clearly have a business succession plan and a process in place. Yeah, that should something happen to him, how do his clients? And by the way, I think he has 2 or 3 clients that I had sent to him because a couple of them were special needs. And so in that particular case, what do you do, right? So even the best estate planning attorneys need to have a plan in place for the something that you may be unprepared for in this particular. Your situation is great, which by the way, I've learned my lessons, Glenn. They're all coming to you. But is that if you want to be with somebody who there is a clear path of succession, so that they're not left in the lurch if something happens to their attorney. Well, their attorney quits the business. They don't have to pass away. What if they quit the business?
Yeah.
Anyways.
But so we don't completely rehash what we did on Glenn's last visit. I'll revisit a little and kind of jump into the direction I want to go in, which is that, so most people think of an estate planning attorney, or my attorney or my financial advisor. That's something that wealthy people have. But as we always say, the bottom line is if you don't have a plan for your money, the government does. And it doesn't depend on how much you make, whether you got pennies or billions or anything in between, they have a plan. So if that is the case with regard to families with neurotypical children or neurotypical family members, it becomes 10 times as important for those of us who have family members with special needs. And again, let's redefine special needs. We're all going to, with luck, be members of the special needs community, either by caring for someone who has aged or aging ourselves, if not some kind of catastrophic injury, even if it's temporary. And so what I wanted to get to is, Glenn, on an appointment that we had with a client, we did a debt elimination, life insurance, and other things for them. And you handle the estate planning portion of it. And I was blown away by the level of specificity to which one can give instruction. Because what a will or a trust is essentially your voice when you've passed away. So speak, if you can, to the level of specification that a person can give, because some people don't really think about that. You stop and think, what do I really want to say when I'm gone?
I had a paralegal that worked with me for quite a while, and at one point she asked, about her own estate plan, and she said, "Well, I have a simple situation. I'm a single mom. I don't really own much. I don't even own a home yet. Do I really need to worry about a plan?" And I took the opportunity because as my employee, I wanted to make sure that she understood the perspective that we take as a firm, and our approach and everything. And so I took the opportunity to kind of walk her through the difference between what most people think planning is to just have documents in place just in case. But planning, real planning, I mean, those are documents. That's important, right? Those documents will help you to enforce your rights. But real planning comes down to, beyond that. It's like you said, it's your voice when you're gone. What would you want to have handled? How would you want it to be handled? And so, with her, I asked her, okay, well, what's important to you? If you weren't around, how would you want someone to raise your daughter? This is one child, right? And a single parent, and she struggled for years with, her ex was abusive and everything. So, what are some of the things that would be important to you? First of all, who would you leave her with? But how are they going to take care of her? How is she going to be raised? If you're not there to walk her down the aisle, what do you want that experience to be like for her? If you're not there to help her to make decisions when it's time to, go out on dates, or to be able to, anything like that, then what are the things that would be important enough to you to make sure that they're followed? And what are some of the things that maybe are not as important, but you might still want to have a say in, right? And let's put that on paper, because even with the best intentions, anybody else is not going to know those things. And it becomes even like, so my kids are all young, right? And it's the same with a lot of special needs family situations where, we have a family member that's basically his mental age is 8 years old. He gets along really well with my oldest, who's 9 years old right now. But he's in his in his 30s, right? And so the idea is that when kids are young enough, or when their mental age is young enough, that they can't explain to somebody what you would want for them as a parent, how they should be raised, what kind of decisions you would want for them.
For sure.
The everyday sort of habits and things that they're used to, that if you're gone, they're going to have enough to deal with, and stress and everything else.
That is so huge. That is so huge. Because when we talk about, for instance, in my family's case, we talk about my son, we're talking about autism. Autism is about routines and the firestorm, short or long, that takes place if the routine is broken. So think about that. Those of you that are listening, I want you to really stop and think. Like, your child probably likes to eat a certain thing, maybe by a certain time. You might like things turned a certain way, whether it's the bed sheets, the toys lined up, whatever the case might be. My appreciation for that ran especially deep, Glenn. We had Glenn and I had the privilege to sit with a client this past week, and there was a family dynamic that was very, very it was heartbreaking, but at the same time, very rewarding to be able to be there. And the specifics about what they wanted. And sometimes the other thing is people have to get back to us because the thought is, I need a plan. We need a plan. Yeah, we're going to sit down. We sit down, we move through how everything works. And then when you get to the specifics of the plan, when it comes to what they want, they're sure of that. When it comes to who they're going to entrust with that, then they're kind of like, they're at a stumbling block. So Glenn, touch on that, if you will, people. And I don't know how much you can add to that because it's a very personal choice, but for people that know that they need a plan, but they have no idea who they would entrust, how do you address that?
Well, and I don't think it's just for those that have no idea who they would entrust, because sometimes I think, in our minds we have these shortcuts and we just assume things, right? So well, we have 4 kids. Of course, the other kids are going to take care of their brother or their sister. Yeah, but what if they don't, right? Because sometimes people make different decisions. They have spouses, or they have, I don't know. There's a really good movie that's on Disney Plus that's about this kid who's going to college. Parents die and he has to take care of his brother, right? And so, it's a burden sometimes to have to take on that role.
Unexpected.
So,
yeah.
But what if they can't? Then what? Or
Right.
what if they're just not in a position that it makes sense anymore, and the situations change. So sometimes, even for people who do have people in their lives that they would trust with that, we still have to think through it. But yeah, sometimes you don't have somebody in that role, and I think we live our lives so often to take for granted the time that we have, and what would happen if, and all these sort of things, that we don't imagine that it would be necessary, right? So, well, if I was gone, who would take care of my kids? Well, if I haven't ever thought of it, it becomes very difficult decisions. And sometimes, that's why it takes time for them to kind of reflect on it, think through, maybe have some conversations, maybe, build some relationships up, people that you respect, that you like their, their lifestyle, and maybe they're in a comfortable position financially and so on, and you would trust them, but you don't know them that well. Well, get to know them better, right? Because they might be a good option, but the relationship has to exist in order for them to take that responsibility on. So I again, planning seems like it's a one-time thing, but it's not. It's something that's we even call it a living trust for a reason, right? It's a living document.
Right.
Yeah.
Grow with you in your situation and adjust. And with this particular client that Shawn was talking about, she was saying that at some point fairly soon, probably they'll be moving right to another state and build up a whole other community and support network.
Yeah.
And that's something to consider, because that can change the entire plan.
Interesting. Yeah, because every state has a different perspective. Is that right? Every state has different rules around estate planning, or
Yeah,
are
they do.
pretty close to state?
It is
Pretty
similar.
close. Yeah.
But especially if you have a support network, and maybe you're participating in certain support groups, maybe you have community programs that you're part of. You have different people within the family that you're interacting with regularly, and those sort of things. If you move to a completely new community, back to the habits and what's familiar, you don't want to shake it all up on them.
Sure.
Unless you're sure that the right person to take care of them lives in Minnesota, right? And that's where they're
Right.
going to go, and you're just going to let them figure it out. But most of the time, it's not just that clear cut. And you say, well, I want them to stay in the same school. I want to stay in the same house. Well, who could make that happen, right? And maybe it's not even, who you would normally think of. Maybe it's not family.
Sure.
And that's the other thing I wanted to touch on about your services. So I mentioned that you charge a flat fee for the service itself, no fee for the consultation. But then when the plan is put together, people you can meet on an annual basis to revise the plan. So the other thing is, if you sit with most attorneys and do something like that, and it is in your best interest for you and your family to move to another state, and then your village is left behind, and let's say the village includes the person that is, that you've chosen to take care of your kids. If you're going to make a change and you're blessed with, being able to have someone else to do that with Glen Services, once a year he can meet with him to make those changes if necessary, and provided that they're not, considerably detailed and they're fairly straightforward, that can be done at no additional charge. That is exceptional value and very, very rare.
Hey, Glenn, we're your pitch man today.
That's right.
We're giving you the pitch. But I think it goes back to what we were talking about before, the fact that, you're part of a firm that has a nationwide network. And so folks are taken care of no matter what their situation, looks like. And there's value.
Yeah. Let me share two quick stories in that
Love
regard,
that.
right? One of them was, we sat down with a family, young family. Their kids were, the youngest one had just turned like 4 or 5. And the oldest one was now a teenager. And, they said, well, we did an estate plan a while back. We want to review it. We want to update it. There's a lot of changes. We've had a couple kids since then. And we looked at it and I said, well, who's this person that you named as your trustee? And they say, oh, well, that was our neighbor back then. We were really close to them. Oh, wonder what they're doing. They're so awesome, man. We haven't talked to them in a while. Well, what's the last time we did talk to them? 5 years ago.
Oh, my gosh.
Oh, my gosh.
5 years. And this is the person designated to take care of their kids, to take care of all their finances, to take care of all decisions. I mean, and they haven't talked in 5 years. They don't even know where they live now, right? So, I mean, that can happen. So it's important to make sure you update your plan. But then the second story is back to what Shawn was saying. I had to laugh when I heard this because it's so ridiculous. But somebody in the Bay Area had worked with an attorney. They didn't even remember what they paid for their original estate plan, but they were looking to amend the plan, and they were being quoted $4,000 for the amendment. And I said, well, how much did you pay for the plan originally? They didn't remember, but I said, that's more than most attorneys would charge for a simple plan. They're charging you that just for the amendment, right? So it might make sense to work with someone else at this point.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
It is. I mean, and this is a good story just for people to understand that, this like finances in general are good conversations to have openly with your family so that there's a, level of expectation, there's sharing of information, and it's an ongoing process. It's not that you just kind of put something in place and then stick it in a safe and walk away. Because your situation changes. Maybe your property changes if you put it into a trust. Maybe you added more assets. Maybe you've changed your assets. Maybe in this particular case, you've changed the trustee, or how you want your assets to be distributed. Maybe that's changed. Maybe you add in there, somebody and their spouse, and then they've gotten divorced, and now you just want to leave it to your family member and not the spouse. So there's so many situations that this should be kind of a living document, which is why having access to you to be able to review on a regular basis makes a lot of sense.
Well, the other thing is, sometimes we hear families, clients, individuals say, that's ridiculous. I can't believe anybody would pay that much for their estate plan or for an attorney or for, this sort of thing. I would never do that. But the thing is that it's really comes down to what you value, right? I mean, if you consider somebody paying for, Netflix and Disney Plus and Hulu and all the, you have all of these subscriptions, and the average person says, well, I would never have 7 different subscriptions, but sometimes it makes sense, right? Like my brother-in-law is an actor. So part of his job, part of his business, right? He has his own business that he runs all of his expenses through is, he needs to see what's going on. He needs to see what shows are out there. He needs to see, see who the different studios are that are doing things. It's a write-off for him, so it makes sense. For the average family, maybe it doesn't. But it's the same thing with your estate plan. And in particular for special needs families, a lot of times, again, it comes back to, you say, well, I don't want to pay that much. I don't want to, but it's especially important for your situation. So it's really just a question of, is it important enough to justify the expense that you're going to put into it? And, I guess that's a personal question.
Sure. It used to be, I know now I have AT&T for my internet for my house. And if I want to add the AT&T, direct TV component, for me just to have TV in my home, it's $165 a month, which if you think about it, right, there's about $1,900 a year. I could have that and watch TV, which actually takes away from my productivity, or, pay that for an estate plan, like a simple estate plan. like you're right, how people value. And Shawn and I talk about this all the time. It's how do people evaluate cost versus value, right? Some people look at it as it's an expense. Oh, it's money I've got to shell out. But the reality is it is really more of a value proposition because, first of all, the work that you do, I will tell you this, when I did a lot of work in the public market. I had a lot of on my assets, a ton of stock in a bunch of different companies, and I had to set up a trust, and it was a little bit more complicated than a regular trust. The firm that I went with charged me $8,500 for my trust, and like your client, and if we wanted to make changes, which we ended up having to make changes to it, it was thousands of dollars to make changes. And finally, I was like, this doesn't even make any sense, especially as you divest of some of those assets and think about, we're changing our situation. That doesn't make a lot of sense. But to have some flexibility and work with somebody that can help you keep guidance, it is worth it. By the way, the amount of money that I paid relative to the size of my estate was minuscule, really. So that doesn't really. So again, people have to sort of evaluate what are the legal costs you're going to have to take on if you pass, or your family's going to have to take on if you pass away, and then you got to go get this out of probate. Right? If you go to probate court, you're gonna have to pay an attorney to represent you. Would you rather have it done up front where you have control of where things are going than have your family have to bear the burden of dealing with it after the fact? They're going to probably pay more in that situation than you will in setting it up.
Well, and sometimes those costs on the back end, we don't realize how severe they can be, right? So we had a situation that we heard about after the fact. There was a husband and wife, second marriage, right? And they only owned one house, and they were both on title, but they didn't own it as joint tenants. Instead, they owned it as tenants in common.
Tenants in common. Oh boy.
And so the husband passes away, and all the stepkids, all of her kids, they know that everything's going to mom, and they have no problem with it. Everybody's in agreement, right? Everybody's happy to make sure that the house stays with her, and it goes to probate. The judge treats it as a formal probate. 2.5 years later.
Oh my gosh.
Right? 2.5 years was the process that this took. 2.5 years later, they had lost 2/3 of the value because the judge forced them to sell the property to satisfy, creditors and pay, property taxes and so on. There was agent fees taken out. There was, probate costs. There was attorney's fees. There was, all these things and so they lost 2/3 of the value simply because they hadn't titled things properly in the title on the home, right? And so sometimes we imagine that, well, how bad could it really be if I don't have a plan? Well, it could be pretty bad, right? Hundreds of thousands of dollars. And even if you spent $10,000 on your plan, it's better than having to put up with what would happen.
Hundreds of thousands of loss. Yeah.
It's almost like, it could go smooth, and probably will if you have all willing parties. But how much of a percentage do you want to play with in terms of the judge that gets assigned to the case? Because it seems like that's what it comes down to. It's just an individual. The judge could be like, well, it seems very obvious that everybody's in agreement. Let's go ahead through. Or you can have a judge go in the opposite direction. What's the value? Not the cost. The cost and value should be confused.
If you're in a state like California, you don't even have much of a choice on the process, right? Like, you can't get through a probate in less than 1.5 years because the court system's backed up that just to get hearings takes a long time.
Yep.
And then, and talk about stress on the family. Sometimes it's not that people are actively wanting to contest anything. Sometimes it's simply that they're busy. And, if they don't handle something right away, it delays the process for everyone. And all of a sudden, emotions are heightened. And, one of the siblings is pointing fingers and saying, oh, well, they probably didn't do this because they're going to contest it. They're going to fight it. They're talking to an attorney. We don't know that. I mean, maybe they just, were gone for the weekend. There's so many things that can happen that can make it more complicated. And why spin the wheel and, take that chance, especially in the situation where, so we had a young couple, and they went down to Mexico for the weekend. They had a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and they left them with grandma, right? Grandma had helped take care of them ever since they were born. And they were in a tragic car accident. Both of them passed away on the way back. So now grandma knew that her son would have wanted her to be the guardian for the kids. So she nominates herself to the court and says, I'm willing to take them, and this is what my son would have wanted. and the judge refuses to give them to her because he says, you live in a 1-bedroom apartment, you live on Social Security, you can't take care of these kids, we're not going to give them to you. So what happens if that happens? Instead, the kids went into the foster care system
Oh boy.
for 2.5 months while the family all came together and they discussed and tried to find somebody that the court would accept. And then they finally nominated one of the aunts, and she was accepted by the court because she had a good job, she owned a home, she was single, and she never wanted to have kids. So, what kind of a life are they going to have? That's not what the parents would have wanted. And of course, grandma's heartbroken, right? But, if we think about how horrible the foster care system and how horrible that would be, if you have a special needs child, then that is actually the default.
Yep.
Because
That's
will get involved and they consider themselves an interested party. So any interested party can nominate themselves to take care of your kids, but the state is going to give itself preference, right?
And here's where the crapshoot part comes in. For those that know my story, that my wife and I have 7 kids, 4 of which are her sister's biological children. Before we adopted them and we were legal guardians, we worked with social workers and they would visit once a month, and they had made several visits when I stopped to realize everything goes pretty smoothly with us. That too, just like the judge, is a crapshoot. So it's a crapshoot as to who the social worker is, but then it's also a crapshoot as to who your kids are going to be placed with. So in a situation like that, you're talking about, and I've never stopped to think about that before. If your child has special needs and you don't have a plan in place, the default is the foster care system. And as much as they go through the vetting process to vet those that become foster parents, you don't really know who you're going to get.
Yeah.
That's huge.
Yeah. So having a plan in place makes, I mean, we talk about this all the time when it comes to things like life insurance. I'll just tell you, in Southern California last night, there was a big lightning and thunderstorm that came through LA, and it's been all this morning as well. And I just read that some gal was out walking her dog this morning, got hit by a lightning strike and passed away. Like, you guys, it can happen at any time to anybody, and having a plan in place just takes a little bit of forethought. Like, you want to be prepared for that moment when it's inevitable. It's not. By the way, and we talk about this when it comes to life insurance as well, unlike car insurance, car insurance you put in place in case, right? In case you get in an accident, in case your car gets stolen, in case it's damaged, in case. I've had my car 30 years. I haven't had any of that happen, right? So but life insurance is not in case you die, right? Life insurance is when. It's sort of out of when, not if, not in case, it's when. So having something in place when that inevitable moment happens makes a lot of sense. I want to ask you a technical question, if you don't mind. Just a simple technical question that people have heard about when it comes to trusts and estate planning. Can you just briefly tell people what's the difference between a revocable trust and an irrevocable trust? That's one of the terms that people toss around a lot, and just to give people an explanation of what that is.
Yeah. So what happens is that there's lots of different names and titles that we put on trust, but it really boils down to either revocable or irrevocable. Revocable means you can change it. You keep all of the control over the assets and over the plan as if it was owned in your own name, right? So it's basically just an extension of your estate, and it has the guidelines of what's supposed to be followed, but really it's still just yours. If it's irrevocable, you have to give up some level of control in order to get some level of protection. And normally that means that you're putting somebody else as the trustee or so on. But you give up that control in order to create a separation between you and your estate and what's in that trust. And so because of that, it has its own taxpayer identification number. It's a completely separate entity from you. And depending on how it's structured, it can provide you with protections from losing benefits, or protections from taxes, or protections from creditors or lawsuits.
Is that why somebody would elect an irrevocable trust, to give you that additional level of protection?
Right.
For those types of things? Got it. Because that's
you don't need that protection, then it's very dangerous to use an irrevocable trust, because you might not be able to change it, or you might not be able to make adjustments. But if you need the protection, then it makes sense.
Got it. Got it. Awesome.
Wow.
So, and at what point should people be thinking about about putting a trust in place? Is it at the point where they start to accumulate some assets? Is there a certain level of assets that they should have in order to have a trust in place? Now, again, I'm talking about a family with neurotypical children, right? Somebody who's got some assets, but special needs trust, that's a slightly different animal. But just in general, is there a certain level of assets that makes sense for you to have a trust in place?
In general, when you own real estate is when it's most important, because it's very difficult to transfer the real estate without going through the probate process through the court system.
Okay.
But I'll tell you a story. We had a situation where the mother was divorced. She had a life insurance that she left, in equal shares to her 3 kids. The problem was that when she passed away, the kids were minors. So, when they're not 18, they can't receive the money because they can't own it yet, right? And
Right.
So the life insurance company refused to pay out until they either turn 18, right? They'll save it for them and then they'll pay it out when they turn 18, or until they get a probate and have somebody authorized to be able to, manage the funds on their behalf and get appointed as guardians for them, right? Or conservators for them.
Wow.
And then the kids have to try to figure out, well, how the oldest one's just a teenager, right? So how do we do this? Where do we get the money to be able to do this? How do we go through the process? How do we figure it out, right? And they don't have a good relationship with their dad, unfortunately, because of this situation, he was abusive and everything else. He ended up, taking the youngest one, right? Because the other ones were old enough to be emancipated, but he's in control. And a lot of times, this happens too, is where the natural parent, they have preference on things, but they only show up because there's money, right? And if you can take away the money question, then maybe they wouldn't even be interested, right?
Right.
And so that's the value of having a plan when you have minor children, or if you have a special needs child that's overage, that they can't take care of their own finances. It's important to have a plan anyway.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned this a second, Shawn. Sorry, I've totally taken this over, but I'm fascinated following this line. Can you talk about guardianship? We mentioned it earlier, and then you just mentioned it again, and the importance of assigning a guardian in this particular case. Because again, for minors who are underage, can't receive, is the creation of a guardianship a valuable, or is it a viable alternative to having a trust in place to take care of minor children? Or can you talk about that a little bit?
So there's 2 scenarios that guardianships or conservatorships come up. In one scenario, it's where, let's say that the parents or whoever would normally have the decision-making authority for them, they pass away, they're not around anymore, or maybe they become incapacitated, and somebody else needs to take over, right? In that scenario, you need to designate who you would want to be the guardian or the conservator, and that's part of your estate plan in general, right?
Yeah.
And that need continues for an adult with special needs or with developmental disabilities or something like that, where even beyond age 18 they're still going to need it. But the second scenario is for the individual or the child that has a need like that will continue beyond age 18, and even if the parents are still alive, your rights as a parent end as soon as they turn 18.
18, that's right.
The law is blind. They don't care what your situation is.
Yeah.
Because now you're an adult, and under the eyes of the law, you're capable of entering contracts and signing and making decisions on your own, and nobody else has automatic authority to do that for you. So, like, I have a friend of mine, and he has a daughter with cerebral palsy, and she's she's not nonverbal. She's not able to really communicate, and she never learned to really sign her name or be able to write things the way that most of us can. So she's 19 years old. They go to the doctor like they always do. The doctor's not in, their regular doctor, so they get assigned to a different doctor, and they require for her to sign a waiver as part of the doctor's visit. And well, the dad and the mom are right there, and they say, well, we can sign for her. No, you can't, because she's 19 years old. She needs to sign. Well, you know that she doesn't know what she's signing. Yeah, it doesn't matter. She needs to sign. So those are the issues that come up, right?
Interesting.
And when you turn 18, then that's an immediate sort of shift.
And is that where what the medical directive would address?
Yeah. I mean, if you have a medical directive, you can authorize somebody to make those decisions on your behalf, right? So if you have a high functioning, child that still needs some assistance, they could sign their own medical directive. But
Right.
but if they're not able to, then that's where the guardianship or the conservatorship comes in, because the court has to give you that authority.
So let me ask you this. Let's use Shawn as an example. Shawn's son is 15 years old, right? Almost 16, right, Shawn? Almost
16. He turned 16.
He just turned 16.
last
Oh my
month.
gosh.
Yeah.
That's so fast.
Yeah.
He's turned 16. So at 18, so in 2 years, what steps should Shawn and Laura take to be able to sign those things on Elijah's behalf? What steps should he take? They're still parents, but now of an adult.
Yeah. So, at that point, if Elijah's at the point where he can make the decision himself to sign his name and say, at a minimum, be able to say, yeah, I understand that there are situations that I can't handle by myself, and I want my parents to be able to help me, then we can have him sign a power of attorney or a healthcare directive and authorize them to be able to make those decisions. We had a situation where, one of our clients has a child with autism. He's, 19, 20 years old. His friends went with him to a car dealership. And next thing you know, he's coming up with a new car, right?
Yeah.
And so, they go to the car dealership and they say, hey, my son needs to get out of this contract. And they're like, no, we hear this all the time. Parents don't want their kids buying cars and blah, blah, blah. We're not going to let him out. He's like, well, he has special needs. He's on the spectrum. He's not going to be able to make the payments for this car and everything else. And they said, well, he's locked into a contract.
Oh my gosh.
So, in those sort of situations, having a power of attorney at a minimum allows you to be able to have the conversation, right? Having a guardianship or a conservatorship allows you to make decisions that maybe the child, maybe Elijah, for example, would oppose. Maybe he says, well, I want to keep the car. I don't care what you say, Dad. I'm going to keep it, right? And if you want to override his decision, then you need a conservatorship.
So going back and using Elijah as an example, so if Elijah is not capable of saying, yeah, there's going to be certain times I want them to have it, but let's just say he's not able to do that. And I'm sorry, Shawn, I'm not using you as an example, but just to make it.
Yeah, it's okay.
It as an example for folks. So if he's not able at 18 to say, yes, I'm going to hand this over, I'm going to sign over my guardianship rights to my parents. So let's say he's not. What would Shawn and his wife do in that particular case to be able to maintain that control?
Yeah, so then you would have an action that you initiate with the court and basically say, we want to nominate ourselves to be the conservators or the guardians. Some states call it conservator over the person and the estate, depending on whether it's financial or over, your person and healthcare and so on. Some states call it a guardianship if it's over you and your person, and a conservatorship if it's over the money. But yeah, he would initiate, that process.
And could they start that before he's 18, like in anticipation of him turning 18? Could they do that?
That's the way to do it. In fact, a lot of states waive a lot of the filing fees and everything to make it easy for parents to be able to do that as soon as their kids turn 18. That's kind of there's a natural window there. That's kind of the ideal time to do it. And that's probably the easiest guardianship or conservatorship to be able to get is as a parent over your special needs child. But it's, it's important to kind of jump on it right at the beginning, right when they turn 18 in order to get some of those benefits. Otherwise, the idea is that the court is going to appoint somebody to represent the child's interest also and make sure that this is appropriate and it's necessary, right?
Right.
And then they may or may not agree that it's appropriate and necessary, and that can become more complicated. But the other thing is that sometimes because when you get a guardianship or conservatorship, you are taking away the rights of the individual, and a lot of times parents don't want to do that. I don't want to take away.
That's tough. That's a very
right.
tough call. Yeah,
Fine line
yeah.
there,
Glenn,
for sure.
let me ask you this. So let's say, for instance, so in terms of benefits, because the other thing we talked about with having a special needs trust is to protect the benefits, the financial benefits that a loved one may be receiving. SSI, Social Security, is tied to income, flat out, right? Whether or not you qualify for it depends on the income you have, and this is why the trust is important. This is why the life insurance comes into play with that also, but that's a different story for another time. But SSI, IHSS, in-home services, that is tied to income, but then changes at, say, the age of 18. What's your suggestion then if you have a situation where someone doesn't have benefits to protect now, but anticipates that they may in the future? Is it best to simply wait till that time? I'm assuming you're going to say no, but have the ball rolling and a plan in place prior to the qualification for those benefits?
If you're getting close, to 18 and you want to do it ahead of time, it's not a bad idea, because you almost always, and I don't work for the government. I don't really know exactly what they do, but this is what I've heard from families.
Who does?
Right? They say that it's almost inevitable that the first time you apply, you're going to get rejected.
Right.
And you pretty much need to apply 3 times before they really take a look at your application. So, for any of you who are going through that process and you're discouraged because you got rejected and you're like, well, why did they reject me? It's probably because they didn't even look at your application, to be honest.
So listen to that. If you guys, the greatest things are caught, not taught. So you just heard that. And if you're not careful, it'll go right by you. There's how important it is to plan, because the IHSS is something that it's commonly thought that you're going to be denied the first, if not second time around, and have to do so 3 times. So all the more reason why the best time to put a plan in place, regardless of anything that has taken place in the past, is now. I want to ask you this, Glenn, as we get ready to wind down.
For SSI and Medicaid, by the way.
Yes. Okay, good. I wanted to ask you this as we get ready to wind down. You talked about your first experience, working for a boutique law firm and everything. Tell us about your firm, which we put in the chat, intervivosplan.com. You're a founding partner of that firm. Tell us about the journey in the little time that we have left. Did you go from working at this boutique to starting a firm that operates in the manner that we've talked about here, where you don't charge a fee for the service and you're literally, or don't charge a fee for the consultation, and you're taking the time to put a customized plan together at a flat fee and really redefining what it means to serve people as opposed to just sit down with them? How did that come about?
Well, I was happy at the firm I was working at. I was on a partnership track. I was planning on staying there long term. We were building things up, and we had some big ambitions for growing the firm. But I was, 2 things really made the difference. One was I was at an event and they said, interview your future, look at your boss and what they make and their lifestyle. Yep. Is that where you be in 20 years, right?
Right.
And, for me, it wasn't. My boss was making around $70,000 a year. He was on his second marriage. He was struggling every month to bring in enough work for everybody in the firm, and it was just a kind of a stressful situation. I didn't want that to be my future, right? But then the second thing was, we sat down at one point and he said, Glenn, we're going to change our pricing for our estate plans, and we've noticed that a lot of firms are charging more than we're charging. And so we need to increase what we're charging. I said, okay, well, how are we going to do that? And he said, well, we've gone through the numbers of what we want to make professionally, and we've divided that by the number of cases that we think we can handle. And so we came up with, what the new price is going to be. And so from one day to the next, they were going to increase our pricing from $2,000 for an average plan to $4,000 for an average plan. And I said, okay, what additional value are we going to be providing our clients now that we're increasing our pricing dramatically, right? And I have a lot of referral sources that expect, our regular pricing. What can I give them to say this is why you have to pay more? And he said, no, we're not giving any extra value. We're doing the same thing. We're just charging more because it makes sense for us to be able to make more. And I said, well, that's not gonna fly. That doesn't work, right? You have to give more value if you're going to charge more. How can we not, provide this? And yeah, there's inflation and that sort of thing that happens, but how can we not provide a quality service at the prices that people are expecting, because we've told them that we could do it in the past, and now tomorrow we're not going to be able to? But how does that work? And
Yeah.
it just rubbed me the wrong way. So that's where I went off on my own, right? And we started our own firm, and it took us a few months to become profitable. But from the beginning, we knew that we wanted to have a value based sort of solution that if anybody asked, why are you charging what you're charging, we could justify it based on the value we were providing.
Wow, that's tremendous. As we get ready to wrap, the time goes by so fast. If you want to reach Glen, you can feel free to reach out to us at wearejusttwodads@gmail.com. The website is intervivosplan.com. Feel free to reach out and you can have your questions answered. At this point, Glen, I'll ask you really quick. Our effort to change the world is based upon our effort or willingness to be able to change ourselves. Give us, if you can, an example of one belief that you held dearly or believe strongly once, but no longer believe to be true.
Yeah, that's a great question. I grew up in my family. My grandparents went from MLM company to MLM company, right? So as a young, kid and growing up teenager and everything, they took me to all kinds of different seminars and events. And so a lot of these, things that the people and the companies would say stuck with me, and they became part of my internal dialogue, right? And one of those beliefs that I always had was that it takes money to make money, because I heard that so many times.
Yep. I know that saying.
And we had it beat into us so much that, and from an entrepreneurship perspective, by the way, but I had that, ingrained in me so much that as an adult later in life in business, opportunities came up and I would turn them down because I believed that I needed money in order for it to be successful, or in order for it to work. Right. And I just always had the kind of that. But over time, what I've found is that sometimes opportunities come up that just make sense. And the opportunity, to be able to, make money or to be able to be successful or whatever comes up one way or another, even if it doesn't require a lot of investment up front, it can still pay off dividends in the future. And it's more a matter of being at the right place at the right time, having the right connections, right relationships, and being able to take advantage of, opportunities that come your way.
Wow.
Amazing.
Great.
Love that answer, by the way. That I'm always, Shawn and I always share a little knowing smile when he asks the question, because some people are like, oh, I have no idea. That's usually my response. And some people are like, oh my God, great question. And then they give an amazing answer like what you just said. You're right. That's a perception that we generally have. So Shawn's favorite question. So we're going to wrap this episode. And Glen, thank you. For those that are catching us late or you haven't had a chance to watch the entire thing, intervivosplan.com. Glen Wagstaff. Glen's our guest. He's our friend. We've asked Glen to present at our summit. He's been our guest on a couple of occasions. Always a pleasure. By the way, I'll just let you know, Shawn and I use Glen regularly in our financial services business. He's somebody who we trust implicitly. We trust him with our own clients. We refer clients to him constantly because, as you can tell if you've watched any of this episode today, there's just love and care in how he communicates and how he shares himself. So,
and Glen, he's helped my family personally, and we're not even done yet.
Love that. Yeah. So thank you, Glen. I'm going to do a quick wrap up. I'm going to throw it to Shawn to wrap us out. Glen, we appreciate you being here. For everybody who's listening, thank you. We love you. Remember, empathy and love always wins out. See somebody's situation, have some empathy. You don't know what they're going through. Have some empathy. Give them grace. Don't prejudge. And if you look at the world through the lenses of love, the world will just be a better place. So as I say that, and we'll throw it to Shawn to close us out. Thank you again for joining us, Glen, and everybody else who listens. Shawn.
Thank you so very much, Glen. Fantastic to have you here. As I said, just remember, somebody somewhere needs to know that they're loved. They need to know that they're seen. They need to know that they're heard, and they need to know that they matter. Those are the things that bind us. Everybody has the same thing. We need to be more childlike and less childish. Ask more questions and make less statements. The world will be a better place. I want to make sure that I thank the women in my life without whom I would not be. That is my amazing mom, Jan, and my wife, Laura. And for those of you, wherever you might be, whether you're catching us live or listening after the fact on any platform, if you're watching, if you're listening, we love you.
Bye, everybody.